This is Patrick Russell. I am interviewing Stanley Golanka for the first time. This interview is taking place on November the 10th, 2022 at 1 p.m. And this interview is being conducted by the Making History Project, and we are here in Pensacola, Florida. So how are you doing today, Stanley?
Pretty good. In fact, quite well. I talked to my lawyer this morning, and the case looks like it's going in our favor.
Right.
And we could use a mediator, really.
All right, fantastic. Tell me, when were you born?
2 February 1931.
All right, that makes you how old today?
91 and nearing 92.
All right. And where were you born?
Niagara Falls, New York.
All right. And did you grow up in Niagara Falls?
Grew up in Niagara Falls and thought it was great.
And tell me a little bit about Niagara Falls when you were growing up. What was it like?
Well, besides the tourist part, it was an industrial part. You know, this is where Nikola Tesla first got the alternating current, and so it was an industrial town requiring a lot of electricity, a lot of chemical plants, alloy plants. It was a dirty town, but it was 110,000 population. Today it's under 50.
All right. And how big was your family when you were growing up?
Well, I had a brother, a year or two young. In fact, today's his birthday. He would have been 90 today if he was alive. And I had 2 half-sisters. My mother was a widow and my father married. So I had 2 older half-sisters and my brother and I.
Okay. And what did your parents do for a living?
Well, they bought the place, a grocery store and a building, some meat works too. Exactly, I think about a month before the stock market crashed in '29, and the house mortgaged and everything. It was a tough time. We struggled through the Depression, but what saved us really is part of the house. It was a big building, and one section of the house was a boarding house, and that's how we really, the grocery store and the meat market was so-so. But Prohibition was still on until 1932, and so my father did some illegal bootlegging, and that kind of kept us ahead of the mortgager.
All right, so supplemental income. And
Supplemental, that's a good way. I'll keep that in mind.
all right. And in terms of education, did you graduate from high school?
Yes, Niagara Falls High School, 1948. I was 17 and I went to Purdue University for engineering and mechanical, and graduated there in January '53.
All right. And while going to school, were you involved in any sports?
No, just intramural sports, intramural basketball. I like basketball, but I never was, tall enough for a basketball team. I returned to Niagara Falls for my first job, if that's okay, Bell Aircraft, and I worked there for a year and a half. But the draft started to get on me while working for Bell Aircraft. Engineering jobs were exempt from the draft. Engineers are exempt from the draft. And that went fine until 1954. When the Korean War was over, and they called us in. There were about 20 young engineers working there, and they called us in, you're all subject to the draft. So that's when I started searching, join a reserve or a National Guard or anything. They were all filled up. Everybody was trying to do that. And I looked into the NAVCAD program. It was Naval Aviation Cadet. And I thought I'd sign up for that. I found out that anytime during the flight program that you wanted to quit, they called it DOR, dropped on request, you can get out, and you would have to continue your 2-year service, but if you wait about 15 months into your program and drop out, the Navy didn't want you, so you went home. That's what was in the back of my mind going into the NAVCAD program here in Pensacola, Florida. But that's how it got me started. I was thinking maybe I'll DOR and come back. I've got a girlfriend back there. You know, I'm happy in Niagara Falls, but things didn't work out that way.
Okay, so Korean War is over and there's still a draft. So
Yes.
then you enlist in the
NAVCAD program.
NAVCAD, okay. And what does that stand for?
Naval Aviation Cadet.
Got it. All right. And how long were you in the military?
Just a little over 20.
20 years.
I should have stayed longer.
All right, so even though, so the draft propelled you into a whole new direction.
Yeah, and doggone it, then I started liking it.
All right, and so let's take it from the start then. When you enlisted, did they send you to basic training?
Yes, here in Pensacola, was most of the training was here. There was a thing called pre-flight, and that was 4 months, 16 weeks, and from there we'd move into the first field. There was no aviation officer program at the time, so in my case, since I had a degree, at the end of my pre-flight training, and then it continued a few months, I got commissioned as an ensign in the Navy. But I hadn't finished my flight training yet. And all the flight training, all the basic training was done here in Pensacola. We had many more outlying fields than we do today. And I progressed from one place to another, you know, getting a down here sometimes, and we did aerial gunnery here and some little bombardment formation flying, and a lot of solo. We used the T-6 aircraft, SNJ. It's a pretty nice airplane. It's but rather difficult for a fellow who had never flown, or all of us, and I wasn't the only one. It was a advanced trainer in World War II, and the Navy used it as a primary trainer. And it took 19 flights before you're checked for solo, and then you soloed and went on. And I was here for 1 year, and I chose multi-engine. The pipeline, as they call it, split those who want to go multi-engine and those who want to go single-engine fighter. Well, I wanted to socialize, I guess, so I went multi-engine, and that was Naval Air Station Hutchinson, Kansas, and out in the middle of a field, but the town was terrific. I can't say enough about the people of Hutchinson, Kansas. Very down-to-earth, trusting type. And at Hutchinson, Kansas, we went into larger aircraft, P-2V, which is a patrol bomber, anti-submarine mostly, and that was quite an airplane. And it was used, you know, it's the one that had the record flying from Australia to somewhere in Ohio, non-stop, non-refueled for many years. And in fact, it's in the museum at the Naval Air Station here. But I liked it, and I thought, like everyone there, we were going to fly patrol planes, P-2Vs. And they selected 3 of us for some reason, I don't know why. to try us out in a transport squadron, a VR squadron, which supposedly is not the career way in the Navy. And in my case, it turned out the best fundamentals for my career in aviation. So I got assigned to VR-6, that is Naval Transport Squadron 6, at an Air Force base in McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. And it was great flying, but basically we at that time did not have, the Navy didn't have what they call a NFO, Naval Flight Officer, which is a navigator and maybe radar operator, whatever. So in those days, after I finished flight training at Hutchinson, Kansas, I spent 2 more months as a navigator. And once I got to a transport squadron, I remember one of the older guys, 40 years old, 45, saying, I'm sorry to see you here. You seem like a nice enough chap, but you're going to be navigating the whole time, And I said, oh, no, is that right? But it didn't turn out quite like that. We did a lot of navigation crossing the Atlantic. We were flying, of course, to England, France, and to Germany. And so for me, it was a ball. It was wonderful. And they did give us flight time, too. They trained us. We were the 3 youngest fellas in the squadron. We competed amongst ourselves for who could get the most time. And we were well taken care of by these older guys that kind of looked upon us like they're kids, And we got a lot of time. Now, they were all reservists. Not all, that's too much of a statement. A good number of the plane commanders or the captains on the flight were reservists. And after about 1.5 years, the Navy decided to, they called it a RIF, reduction in force. And they told these fellows with 15, 16 years of active duty time, you're out. And now we look around, or the commanding officer looks around and says, what do we got to fly our schedule? And of course, there were 3 of us. We had the time, we didn't have the experience, but they did upgrade us and trained us and made us plane commanders. So we flew flights to Germany for another 1.5 years.
All right, so you...
Maybe I'm getting too far into this.
No. So you started out training, flying planes, then you chose the multi-engines.
Yep.
Then you were focused on being a navigator for a while.
Right.
And then because of the reduction in force, all of a sudden next up, you're the next pilot up.
Yeah, bumped right up. My co-pilot was always senior to me.
And so what type of planes are you flying at this point?
Well, the civilian version would be a DC-6, actually DC-6B. The Navy called it an R-6D. The Navy had a wonderful system. R, transport, 6 model, and D, Douglas. So it was a 6 model of Douglas aircraft. When the Air Force was formed in 1948, somewhere around 59, just about the time I was leaving the transport squadron, they changed those designation to C-118, and that's what the C-118 is. I mean, so when you ask the question, civilian version DC-6B, C-118 military, but I like to stick with the R-6D Navy.
Mm-hmm. And so this is transporting of troops and personnel?
The first 1.5 years we were transporting personnel and troops. And the last part we went more into cargo because our R-6Ds, our C-118s were not as fancy for passengers. The box lunch was our means, our food, where the Air Force had fancier airplanes on the same squadron. There were 2 squadrons that were Navy, and I think maybe 6 squadrons that were Air Force at that time. And they had fancier airplanes, so they flew dependents in Germany, France, or wherever, England. I liked it.
How many personnel would your plane hold?
Oh, 60, 65 passengers.
Okay. And how often were you flying?
Well, like I say, we volunteered for every flight that we could get a hold of. So it'd be about 2.5 round trips to Europe every month. And those are longer flights than today, obviously. I would be, I'd say 8, 10. I think maybe I'm not stretching it when I say 12 to 14 hours going over. We flew from McGuire to Newfoundland, refueled, Prestwick, Scotland, and then to Frankfurt or to, not nonstop, we'd crew change, usually in Scotland. If the weather was bad, we'd fly via the Azores. And it gave us a lot of experiences, sometimes through Iceland. Yeah.
And for your military career, what were the dates of your service?
Say that again?
For your military career, what were the dates of your service?
By date, the
Month and year, when you started and when you ended?
I started, of course, in June of 1954 and ended 1 September 1974.
Okay. And what was your highest rank?
Commander, O-5.
And did you ever deploy overseas?
Well, mostly Prestwick, Scotland. They finally staged some of us. That's where I got a lot of flying experience. A flight would come in, we'd take the plane and continue it to Frankfurt, Germany, or Châteauroux, France. If you want to call that overseas, yes, because I was stationed as a part of the squadron in Prestwick. And yeah, that would be, of course, later on I was in Guantanamo for 2 years. I think that's overseas. If we flew sometimes to Algiers, I was involved in the Hungarian airlift in 1956. Yes, and the commanding officer knew I knew a little Polish, so he thought Hungarian, and so did I. It was similar, and Hungarian is not a Slavic language, period. So he says, Stan, you be my co-pilot. He was a full captain, and come with me. You'll be my co-pilot. Well, that was great. So we we were the first squadron, first airplane off, and we got to Munich, Germany, where the Hungarian were already there after their revolution in '56. And we land, the captain says, Stan, we'll go over there and say, welcome aboard, or something in Polish. Said, I did. I went over there and said, witamy na pokładzie samolotu, lecimy do Ameryki za parę godzin. We'll be going to Poland, we'll be going to America in a few hours. And they all look at me like, what the hell is this guy talking about? Found out the only common word is cukier, sugar, and it's in Hungarian too. But we did get back. We had to fly via Iceland. Iceland was a neutral country. It wouldn't allow the Hungarians off of the plane to get a bite to eat or something like that, so we brought another stack of box lunches on board. There was a little bit of a rub when we landed in Harmon Air Force Base in Stephenville, Newfoundland. We were the first one back. You know, the Air Force was behind us, and we land, and he says, Stan called it, tell them we want minimum ground time, we just want to refuel and move on. And they tell us, follow me to the parking area. And what they did was put us way out away from the terminal and told us just to wait there. And the captain was almost out of his mind, and we're screaming on the thing, we want to leave. And the reason being, the first flight landed in Philadelphia with the cameras and all the fanciness, and it was an Air Force plane. And they wanted to hold us back, not to be the first. So we landed back at McGuire without the fanfare and stuff.
And who were you transporting at that point?
Pardon?
Who were you transporting at that point?
Hungarian freedom fighters, I guess they called them.
Okay.
And they moved them on somewhere. Turned out one of my bosses at Boeing was not on the flight, but he was one of those he was only 14 years old when he came over in 1956 and ended up being, I guess, vice president at Boeing.
So this is when the Soviet Union invaded Hungary.
Yeah, that was 56.
Were you involved in any other type of campaigns like that or airlifts?
We went to Argentia, which was just a different, I would say that would be the more spectacular one. I wouldn't call them routine because every flight was really an interesting flight, especially to me and to my two friends, colleagues. We had a lot of good times when we were ashore. I mean, in these places, Frankfurt, and the Scottish people liked us a lot too. I mean, like I mentioned, Hutchinson, Kansas, Scotland was very, very good to Americans, especially the girls. I was a bachelor, and it was a lot of fun.
Were you involved in any type of campaigns that involved combat situations?
Well, later on, I mean, after 59, I went to line school in Monterey, California, came back here as a flight instructor in Pensacola at Whiting Field, one of the outline fields. And from there, I transitioned to helicopters and we had a school here at Ellison Field, it's no longer there. Transition to helicopters. That was kind of a challenge for me. I mean, here you are in flying, you don't want to stand still because that's how you crash. And here you are flying and setting over the ocean or Atlantic and 40 feet above the water and listening to Soviet submarines. That was what you might call a more active naval job. As I said, VR was considered by the old timers like VD in your health record. You don't want it. It's not considered the real flying out there. So, but it was pretty tricky flying. I was on a carrier Wasp, the USS Wasp CVS 18. Of course, that's long gone. By the way, Pulaski, when he was killed outside of Savannah, Georgia, a cavalry officer, his body or his wounded person, somehow they transported him out to a brig. I think it's a type of ship, brigantine. And the ship's name was Wasp. So there's been Wasps all along. In fact, there's a Wasp now, active duty Navy. But on the Wasp, we flew quite a bit. And our job was we were called a hunter-killer group. Hunt the submarine and kill it if war went that way. But we were able, with our sonar, dip sonar, to pretty much pick out Soviet submarines with no trouble at all. Once we knew the area, we didn't have distance, but the way they had underwater arrays all over the Atlantic, who could generalize where some Soviet submarine or submarines are coming through. They came out of Murmansk over the top of Iceland and down into the Atlantic. And we were up in the North Atlantic most of the time. Well, the Wasp would get out there with their destroyers that had sonar. We had maybe 4 or 5 destroyers screened. And we had 2 types of aircraft aboard, S2, S2Es. They're a Grumman 2-engine airplane that has MAD gear, magnetic and anomaly detection. And we'd go out with the helicopters, dip, and if we had maybe 2 or even 3 helicopters, we'd try to triangulate. And it was easy, quite easy, because our sonar operators, a helicopter had, of course, a pilot and co-pilot, and 2 sonar operators. And those fellows were quite good, and they could pick them out, and the noise of their screws was such that we could even tell which submarine it was. It was like a fingerprint. We knew by the noise that this was this type or this type. And we were quite successful in that. I might add that later on, after I was out of there, in fact, probably early 70s, the Soviets roundabout got what was why our submarines, we couldn't catch our own. The screws were so smooth, and they got the milling process for keeping the screws quiet on the Soviets. And later on, they were just about, I was told they were almost as good as ours, but I wasn't there later on. It was easy. While in that HS-11 helicopter squadron, the air group commander was looking for an operations officer, and they selected me. So I was the air group ops officer for 2.5 years on the Wasp. I mean, we only made one long cruise to the Mediterranean and worked there with some of the Allied countries. But our cruises were short, but almost constant. I mean, 365 days in a year. We were at sea around 300 most of the time. A lot of, I just was recently married, and babies coming, and it was a different time. Because I was so busy, especially when I was an air group operations officer, I just worked all the time, and just grab food all the time. Ate maybe 4 meals a day, 5 meals a day, but lost weight because I was constantly running up and down to the pre-flight, to the primary flight. Anyway, but I did fly the helicopter. I did a little bit of the S2E. The air group commander wanted me to transition a little bit to it, and I did. But I never did a lot of carrier on the S2E. I did helicopter. SH-3A was the helicopter. We had one of the first out of Sikorsky, Connecticut. And that type helicopter is exactly the same helicopter the president flies. It's just plushed up and soundproofed a lot more and things like that, but it's the same helicopter. I don't know what they call it, but it has a twin turbine T-58 engine from General Electric. Very reliable airplane, very reliable. And after Ellison with the reciprocating engines, we were constantly having to adjust the RPM to the manifold pressure, and I'm either over boosting or under boosting. I didn't like those, but the jet helicopter, the SH-3A, you set your setting power and they run at 100%. You never had to worry about them. You want your power, you just take it. But after that squadron, they sent me back to the Naval Postgraduate School after those 4.5 years on the Wasp, sometimes on the Lake Champlain, which was the last straight deck carrier, when the Wasp was damaged on one of our trips across the ocean.
What made you decide to go into helicopters?
Well, that's a good one. I was dating a girl here, and I talked to my detailer or my assignment officer in Washington, and he says, "Where do you want to go?" I said, "Well, I want to stay on the East Coast because I'm thinking of maybe getting married." And he says, "Well, I don't have anything in S2s on the East Coast. You can go to San Diego if you want." Well, I said, "Well, what can I do on the East Coast?" He says, "They're really searching for helicopter types." I said, "Give me helicopters." And that's how I got to helicopter.
And what was so you were on a carrier, you were stationed on a carrier.
Oh, yeah.
What's life like on a carrier and you're going to the North Atlantic? So it's a little rough out there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's cold on the flight deck, but it's adequate. I was senior enough by that time that I had a cabin. I mean, there were two of us in the cabin. Where the junior officers, they call it the JO jungle. They maybe have 10 or 15 guys, cramped spaces. The water is always a problem. You take a Navy shower, which is get wet, soap up, water off, soap up, and then rinse off. So that was kind of a thing, but it's not that bad. The only thing I didn't like about it was my separation from my young wife and my kids that were being born in Quonset Point, Rhode Island, where we were stationed. The ship was in Boston Harbor, but the air group was in Quonset Point. And it was Air Group 52. I had 3 air CAGs, they call them, Carrier Air Group Commanders. Very, and you're practically their assistant, like you're their aide almost, besides operating the 3 squadrons, keeping the operation, and keeping the boss knowledgeable of what's going on in the 3 squadrons. But that's basic. But I did from there I went to Naval Postgraduate School for a master's degree in management.
Before you go there, what's your most memorable moment of hunting a Soviet sub? What's the most interesting story you have there?
It wasn't with me, but a friend of mine went out, he packed a bunch of ice cream in a pack, and when the submarine surfaced, Soviet, he hovered over the fantail. Very illegal what he did, but it can be said now. Poor guy's not living anyway, but he got killed in a helicopter crash later. But anyway, Tom lowered the ice cream to the deck there, and the guys the Soviets tied a vodka bottle to the thing, and we had a bottle of vodka. We didn't use it until we got ashore, but that I thought was kind of memorable. Was an accident that I was also, because I was sent to USC for accident investigation. I had to, the commanding officer of one of those VS squadrons just the pilot and co-pilot. No, they didn't have their MAD gear and radar operators aboard. Was out on a reconnaissance flight one early morning, landed on the deck. It had just rained, it was wet, caught the hook, and going forward, he's folding the wings, and he's just a little fast. I wouldn't say he was, exceedingly fast, but he was fast with a wet deck, and he didn't stop. I mean, he went over a side. And of course, that kind of an accident in the middle of the Atlantic is easy to investigate. You don't have the airplane. With the co-pilot, I'm trying to think of his name. There was overhead hatch. He got out. The captain, or it wasn't a captain. It was a captain of the squadron, but he's a commander. He said, "Get out," and he got out. And the other guy, the deeper they went, the pressure just didn't allow the other fella to get out. I don't know why. Maybe he got knocked out or something like that. So we did have an on-site witness, and he says, I don't remember anything. He says, I just know we're going over, and I wasn't taxiing the airplane. And the next thing I know, he's hollering at me to get out. And I believe him. That, he had a moment of just, you don't realize when things are automobile crashes or anything like that. And so we lost the captain of the squadron, and the fella that got out, he was okay. We had a helicopter. We always carried a helicopter on when there were flight operations. A helicopter would, they call it plane guard, in case of accidents. He went there, picked the guy right up. He was ashore. So we measured the streak marks and did a lot of calculating, and it was kind of an easy investigation there. I investigated a couple more, not on the carrier, but later on, or before we got to this point, here in Pensacola, but it wasn't, one of them was terrible, but those things happen.
How often would you force Soviet subs to surface? And why?
Oh, they didn't want to. I mean, but when they heard the pinging, we could be passive sonar. They don't know we're listening to them. Or we can go active where we're pinging on them, and they hear it. They don't have to come up. And I would say maybe in the 2.5 years, maybe only 2 that actually came up. Now, the our submarines, they were quiet, and their job is to penetrate the shield and try to get the carrier as if they were going to sink the carrier. And they get up and shoot a flare, and that meant that in an actual situation, our carrier would be out. They would be torpedoing it. So they did that every time we had an operation with the American submarines. They usually won in these battles that we set up. We'd put restrictions on them. We'd do things that made it harder for them to get through to us, but they could get through to us.
Did a Soviet sub ever do that, where it
No.
surfaced and
No.
said, "Haha, here we are"?
No. We knew where they were all the time.
Okay, so now, and what was the name of that group that you were with when you were?
Air Group 52, Carrier Air Group 52. And it consists of 3 squadrons, VS 31, VS 28, and our HS 11.
All right. So then you were saying that after that you went to go get some postgraduate work?
Yep, went out to Naval Postgraduate School, and master's program in management. Tough studying. I happened to get into a study group with a bunch of guys, and I'm telling you, it was all day in class, come home for dinner, go back and study in the evening. One Saturday a week, one Saturday evening, there were 4 of us in the group, 5 in the group, and we'd go out with our wives to dinner or something like that, some entertainment. But it was one year of hard work, very hard. I mean, it wasn't, getting a master's in civilian would be altogether different.
What were the topics?
The subjects we took were operations research, which is a tool that business people use for finding out, the maximum production with the minimum resources. We took psychology, we took logic. The professors were all civilian professors. I wanted to go into accounting, and we did take a accounting course, and if you wanted to specialize then in there, you would have to take this professor on. And the SOB didn't like the Navy and didn't like the officer. And his exams were trying to make you look ridiculous. And I can always remember this one exam. In fact, it was a final exam on that introductory course of before you, and that's why I decided not to specialize in accounting. One of the fellas just got so irritated with the problem. This is a Navy, he was a lieutenant commander, this professor was arrogant, I can't describe all of it. And this fellow's about an hour into the exam, it's a 3-hour exam, or you're allowed 3 hours. He's about an hour into, and he gets up and takes the paper and throws it at the professor and says, "I don't have to take this shit from you." And went back and called the detailer and says, "Get me out of this crazy house," And I don't know if he ever went back to school or not, but he certainly wasn't in our group anymore. But those were some of the incidents. I don't know how. Well, after that, there was a shortage of people with masters, at least, at the Naval Academy. And I thought I was going back to the fleet. And they sent most of us, not all of us, to the Naval Academy in Annapolis. And I taught there 3 years. I taught leadership, psychology and leadership, and business management. And that was a good time. I mean, the family was there, and we had good quarters, good thing, and yes, we had to teach, and I enjoyed that part. They have what they call the executive group and the academic group, and I was in the academic group. The executive group are the ones that run the midshipmen, and that was pretty tough duty, because you had to act arrogant and stuff. That's not my style. So I like working with the students. But after that, I was supposed to be the attaché, naval attaché in Jamaica. But the ambassador there was appointed. There's half the ambassadors are State Department employees, and about, I won't say half, maybe a half, maybe a third, you buy the position. Kennedy was the ambassador in England in the beginning of the war, Joe Kennedy. the old Joe, the one that made all his money on liquor. Anyway, and this fellow in Jamaica was one of those. He was appointed by his mother-in-law to have that job, and he had a commander there. He didn't like the commander, and he threw him out, and I was supposed to go in there. When he found out it was another commander coming down, he says, I don't want any commanders, I want a Marine. And so I didn't go there, and so there, I already started school in D.C. for how to behave as an aide, as an ambassador, not ambassador, attaché, a naval attaché. So what are they going to do with me? So they offered me Kauai as operations officer. By that time, my parents were very, very ill. I found out more. The duty sounded awfully great to be in Kauai, barking sands out there, black beaches. But the operations officer, which was my billet, is spend 7 months on some little island called Johnson Island in the middle of the Pacific, and you're there tracking satellites as they go by. And you're there for 6-7 months. I said, oh God, it's just worse than sea duty. There's nothing to do there. It's just a stretch of a piece of runway. So I elected, the finalist thing was Guantanamo. And I went down there. Flying was great. We flew which would be a DC-4, which is a C-54 in the service. It's similar to the other airplane, but it's not pressurized. It's not fast. And we flew to Haiti, Port-au-Prince, every Wednesday morning with the people who were getting rock happy at Guantanamo over for a one-day vacation, independence. And then we'd pick up people from the American Embassy in Haiti, Port-au-Prince, and bring them over to PX and the exchange and stuff like that. And that continued. Every other Wednesday it would be Kingston, Jamaica, and we flew the C-54. We also had, the HU-16, which is an Albatross, I guess. It's an amphibious airplane. Coast Guard used a lot of them. So the duty there was 2 years. 1 year I was the maintenance officer of the Naval Air Station. For the second year I was the operations officer there. And we had helicopters flying the periphery of the thing. It was kind of interesting in the sense it was quite easy duty, but you felt kind of isolated too. And even Bob Hope came down for Christmas one time, put on a show. What we did over there, I'm talking now 1970 to 72, I'm in Guantanamo. Now, the Cubans, we from time to time would get someone usually coming take a boat somewhere from Cuba and come into Guantanamo Bay and asylum, refugees, whatever. And if we get about 30 of them, which was usually a month and a half, they're isolated. Under our treaty, we were not to hold any prisoners, bad people from Cuba. Well, the Cubans, Castro said anyone running away is a bad person, and so I'm sure they knew about it, but we kept them isolated till we got about 30 of them, maybe 20 of them, put them in an airplane, fly them up to Miami, and the Miami group, actually Fort Lauderdale is where we mostly landed, and there was another airfield there, Marine Masters. Anyway, it's not there anymore. but and we dropped them off there. So that was quite a bit of it. The people working in Jamaica, I think National Geographic the last couple of years had a story about the Cubans that live on the base. When Castro took over, some of the Cubans did not want to go back, and the Navy set them up there. Very industrious people, those that I knew, and they worked the overhaul shops and the machine shops and stuff there, and they lived permanently on the base. Another group would come in the morning, work, eat 2 meals here, and then go back, usually, and get paid. But even though most of their money was taken away from them when they crossed the border, they as they told us, told me anyway, that even what's left was enough to keep the family going over there. So we had permanent Cubans, transient Cubans, I guess, and then refugees or asylum seekers. But it was an interesting thing. From there, and that would be going in my last tour, I took a job as executive officer of NROTC unit at the University of Mississippi. And for some reason I didn't fly then. I was bored. And it's me, not the system. The NROTC system was very good. The captain was going to retire, and we had a lot of talk sessions. He said I was supposed to teach a class to the midshipmen, I guess they call them, the cadets or NROTC. But he says, I'll teach the classes, you just take care of the admin, which is not my favorite thing, but he did, I guess not his either, because he just wanted to teach and keep contact with. We had regular college students going through the NROTC program. We had NESEPs, Naval Enlisted Scientific Program. There's one letter missing, NESEPs. These are sailors, enlisted fellas with good abilities, most of them had, sent to college to get a degree and make them an officer. We had those, and then we had one other group, which was a trouble group, Iranian midshipmen, going through the program, getting an engineering degree, and they were selected, and they were good in their field of work, but they always had some kind of social problem, particularly when they were getting ready to graduate. They didn't want to go back, and there was getting married and all kinds of things, and supposedly they told me that their family, they have to go back, or else their family is burdened with some pile of money or whatever they put up, and they lose that if they don't go back. So most of them went back, but there was another thing. If they go crazy, I guess they can stay. And so every once in a while, the hospital will call me and says, we got one Iranian student went berserk here, and what do you want to do with him? I don't know. Keep him. No, I'd get him back somehow or other, and we'd do something. Well, that ended my career. That was 20 years, and I went back to Niagara Falls, which was the biggest mistake I made, because it just wasn't the military.
And in the course of your 20-year career, were you involved in any combat situations at all?
No. Well, at that time now, we went to Vietnam, in the 60s, more or less, that whole period.
So did you do any tours in Vietnam or no?
No, I never got out there. I put that down on my sheet because I thought that would be a career enhancement to have time in Vietnam as an aviator. Some of the fellows coming back, aviators at the Naval Postgraduate School, they didn't, what they said, they didn't like the type of duty it was. This one fella, I don't know if I even should say this, but I will. He's probably not living either. But he said, we would have to go make our strikes in North Vietnam per direction from Washington. Johnson, maybe, at that time. And he says, we're flying along. I remember this one guy flying A4s. And he says, we see a target of opportunity, an obvious North Vietnamese convoy of trucks heading south. We request to the carrier, target of opportunity, request, whatever. Generally, he says, stand by. They call almost continuous communication to Washington. Washington says, continue on prescribed target. And he says that was very demoralizing because you're there to fight the North, and here we are doing things that are not exactly. The admiral didn't have anything to say. He had to get permission from Washington. McCain, I think, got shot down on one of those prescribed flights where they call them SAM. I guess they were Russian, Soviet missile launchers, and usually that was where they were. The other side knew where we were going, maybe. And so that's not the reason I didn't get there. I just didn't get assigned there. I had it down on my, what we call a dream sheet, next assignment sheet. And I also put in for astronaut. I didn't get that either. There's one thing that happened. In those days, there was the services seemed to compete with each other, for lack of a better word. And we were a Navy on an Air Force squadron in that first outfit. And we sort of, maybe it was us carrying a chip on our shoulder. We are the Navy. We're the best. And our enlisted fellows felt the same way. We did too. And the older guys would even more so, having been in World War II, most of them, at the end of no, they were combat fellows, called in because they were reservists into the Korean War and stayed on the reserve until they got, unfortunately, kicked out before they retired. But at the same time, they went into the FAA was just opening up, and all of them went and got jobs, all that I knew anyway. I was a bachelor, I had a date, and my friend, good friend, not living now, he was married. We went to the club, Air Force Officers Club. We had too much to drink, I'll admit that. And going out of the club, there's a nice low boy, kind of a bench, but a nice one. I mean, maybe white leather or imitation leather, probably. My buddy says, let's get that. My date gets the other end. They take it out to my car. It was a 55 Buick hardtop. The windows rolled down. They stuck one end of the part of it was sticking out. And then we decided to go to Trenton, New Jersey, to some Dixieland. I like Dixieland. He, my friend, did too. We went there, came back, brought the. They says, "Hey, this will look good in your snake ranch. In those days, the word snake ranch was a bachelor officer quarters or house. We rented three of us rented a place. It was 3-bedroom, 2 Navy guys, and 1 Air Force. We didn't like, but he happened to be wrong. Anyway, I drove home with my date and that evening. I drove home back to the snack ranch. Well, everything calmed down and we kept flying to Europe and back and everybody's happy. And the Air Force Club is wondering who took the bench, you know. And it so happens the lady that was cleaning our house also cleaned the Air Force. So she saw this thing, it was right out in the living room. And she said, I know where it is, you know. Of course, I was gone at that time. I mean, gone, I was at the airport for some reason. Yes, I know why. Picking up a Red Cross worker coming from France. But the sheriff or somebody comes to the door and says, we'd like to come in, I understand you have a bench. The Air Force guy says, you can't come in here, it's a private home. He says, okay, you just stay here, we'll go get a search warrant, you know. He got a search warrant and came in and took the bench. They found they had 2 glasses. I don't know whether martini glass. In those days, people drank martinis. So when I say people, we did. And that kind of thought was the end of it. Well, it's not the end of it. The Air Force really wanted to persecute those damn naval officers. And that's my statement, but it was like that. So they have what they call in the Navy, the commanding officer selected a group of Navy officers to, it's like a board of inquiry, but they have a name for it. And these are my friends. I mean, they're older than me, and well, they're all older, but so the guy says, you guys, what the hell are you doing in the Air Force Club, messing it up, and now we got problems. And he says, what can we do to you that won't hurt you too much? And he says, well, you can put us in hack, which means we're restricted to our quarters, but we're allowed to fly missions and training flights, whatever. And so they said, okay, that's what you get. 2 weeks in hack, and that's fine, you know, just stay in our room, read or whatever. Can't go to the club, can't go anywhere, off the base. When the Air Force General at McGuire at that time finds out about this, he is livid because these guys had just got a slap in the wrist when they took a bench out of the officers club. Our commanding officer's pretty smart guy. His name was Captain Sweet. He orders us, gives us official orders to go to the 4th Naval District in Philadelphia for disciplinary action. So that kind of satisfied the Air Force General that, okay, this Captain Sweet, of course, is an 06 equivalent to a colonel, okay, just 1 rank below this brigadier general of the Air Force. And so we pack up and drive off to Philadelphia, not very far. We get to Philadelphia and we're assigned some desk work. I don't know, I've had something to do there for about a week. And then we're called in to see the Admiral. And the Admiral reads us up and, well, he reads the charges as the JAG there, the Navy lawyer. He reads us all the things we did wrong, bad, brought a lot of dishonor on naval service, caused grief to the Air Force. Whatever, I still have the letter on my safety deposit box. But then the admiral says to the JAG to leave the thing. Now there's only 3 of us. He starts cussing and swearing at a bunch of dummies. Why do you do these things? He says, I did it too, but I not exactly what you did, but I did it at a Navy club, not at a Air Force club, causing all this inter-service rivalry. He says, you heard the charges. Here's yours, here's yours. There are no copies. In those days, there was no computers, so no copies made, no carbon copies. This is the originals. If I've gotten a lot of good words from your captain about you two, about all the flying you do and all the good stuff. If you will get your ass in your cars, I have called the superintendent of the postgraduate school in Monterey, and you'll enroll you in line school. It's a 1-year school. That's not the postgraduate program later on. And get your no leave time, no proceed time, just enough. You get the mileage to get out there. That's all. So we jumped in our cars and drove out there. We were the youngest in line school, it was called. So that's one of the bad things I did, but it always worked out fine.
And what was that school like?
That school was just kind of it was basically, I don't think they have it anymore. It was basically to get us to be your career types, maybe equivalent to the Naval Academy courses. Some of them were. They were, again, civilian, some Navy professors, though, too. It was a good school, but not like the postgraduate school, which was just study all the time. This thing here, we had lapses. Then the Navy sent me to USC for accident investigation for 2 months, 3 months, that's all. But I love the Navy. I love the way they took care of you if you went off the beaten path, and if you put out, they'd put out for you. In other words, I loved it.
And what did you do after the Navy?
Well, the big mistake was to go back to my hometown, and Thomas Wolfe wrote that book, Look Homeward, Angel. I think the last sentence is, you can't go home again. And that kind of summed up the thing. I got there, Niagara Falls, my dad was still alive. I took a job with a bank. I mean, before I left the Navy, I sent out a bunch of applications or letters. And M&T Bank hired me to be a management trainee. And I still don't like banks. And while there, they assigned me to a substation, sub-branch office, I guess they call it. And I went through that program of theirs, and I got assigned to a branch, and I was working there at the desk. And I realized that this is not for me. But doing my job, every other Friday, they call us to Buffalo, headquarters at that time. And on one of the Fridays, they said, if you've heard a rumor, now this is 1974, and banks a lot of things were falling apart. It was the wrong time to get out of the Navy, I'll tell you. If you've heard rumors that the bank is having some problems, put it out of your mind. You folks are the future of the bank. You're the trainees. That's Friday. Monday, the branch manager calls and says, well, Stan, he says, they want you at a office in Kenmore, New York. So I went up there, and I find there's about 4 or 5 of us there. And they called in one by one. They says, "That's it. We've got to let you go. We can't keep you any longer." And one after another. There were a couple or three. Two of them were girls, I think, and the third one, they went back to being tellers. But the 4 or 5 of us were, well, we thought we were going to be managers. And that was it. He says, "You go back to your branch manager. The bank is closed, but he's waiting for you." So I go back there, and he gives me what I had in my desk. The classic term at that time, when you know you're really finished: "Stan, let's do lunch sometime." I am still waiting for that lunch. But and then I kicked around. I had a terrible transition. I worked for the city engineer. I had a job there. It turned out wasn't that bad. And in fact, the city manager later on sent me a letter when I was already at Boeing to come on back. I'm now the county manager. I need you as an assistant. So maybe I made some marks there. I don't know. I worked in the city. I worked for a contractor putting up metal buildings in the western New York, which was dying already. They had excess warehouses and excess buildings, but I worked for them for a year. Then I went to Robert Morris College in those days. Today it's Robert Morris University. I got a job as an assistant professor to teach management there. So I took the job, went down there 2 years. Boring as all heck. Again, I just, what the hell am I doing here? And through just a good luck situation, my wife at the time, she's my ex now, we were married 25 years, and it fell apart, and that's one reason I got to work in Poland, is they were, in 1989 or 88, they were looking for an engineer who was experienced in a 767 that they bought, but one of the requirements is no dependents, because it's a hardship. Well, my wife had just divorced me a couple of years earlier. And so I was up. There were a couple other guys that I had to compete with, but I got the job. And that was another good thing. But I went, again, back to my ex. Her father, who had left the family when she was just 10, and brought up here in Pensacola by her grandmother and mother, her father, who he hadn't seen in years, shows up, wants to make amends and wants to be there. He's a funny character. He's a con man too, but he's a funny man. And so I go out there, and I was going to work with him. He builds 1 or 2 houses. I wanted to do that. And after the first day, and the way he treated a couple of guys that worked for him, I said, I think I'll take an interview at Boeing. And I did. And I interviewed 3 engineers, and one of them happened to be an engineer that I knew at Bell Aircraft, but he was a senior engineer at Bell, and he was at Boeing too. Lead engineer, they call him. And I interviewed him. Personnel, and now it's human resources, but in those days, personnel tells me, fine, we're going to hire you. I said, that's great. You'll hear from us in about 2 weeks. That's great. I said, I'll go back, sell the house in Pittsburgh. I had an RV. I'll drive down here to Pensacola. My wife's mother was here, grandmother, and we did that. You'll get a telegram. So I get back to Pittsburgh after these 2 weeks, and no telegram. I called personnel. personnel says, well, we've thought it over, and you've been away from engineering, 24 years or so, 20, and again, it's in the 70s, and Boeing was struggling a little bit then. And so, there's no job for you. Okay, what do I do now? My house is for sale. I have a contract, I didn't sign it yet. A flash came into me. I says, I know that one lead engineer over there. And I called him up. His first name is Stan, but he has he's not Polish at all. He says, I says, Stan, I thought I had an offer, and personnel just let me know that they had no. He says, hell, I'll take you, you know. And that was Thursday. Monday, I had a telegram saying you're hired. Report to Boeing on August of 1978. And I worked 23 years for Boeing. I didn't like so much working in Seattle. It was just too many engineers. You didn't feel like you really, at least at the work I was doing. The first job was terrific. I was in space, and I did a demonstration of the maintainability of the IUS program, the inertial upper stage in the shuttle. The clam doors open up and this thing sticks out, and there's a bunch of computers around there, and I had to demonstrate that actually for the Air Force, and got a lot of pats on the back and certificates and all that stuff, and no pay raise. But that's it. Now you know my life story.
And what kind of engineering were you doing for Boeing?
The first job, as I said, was in space. I was putting together, again, I wasn't doing any computerized. Actually, Boeing was slow in getting, I didn't do any drafting. I was working on these different projects, like show us, Air Force put out the word, show us that this IUS thing that sticks up there and we shoot off can be done. And so that was my job. From there, I went and taught some parts of the 727. From there, I went to aviation safety, because of my safety background, I guess, on the 757, the best damn aircraft that was ever made. Boeing sold over 1,000. But for some reason, they shut that down because they weren't getting enough sales for a while. That is exactly the airplane they need today, maybe with different engines. It's long, it's a single aisle, but they keep stretching this damn 737 longer and longer, and now they wanted 737 MAX 10. God, the FAA is giving them a little trouble on that because of the other MAXs. I'm worried about things. Basically, I'm worried because I own a hell of a lot of their shares. And I've seen it go from $420 a share down to 98 or so. I think it's now 160. I have a lot of it. That's my basic whole everything. You probably got more than you wanted from me.
Well, is there anything that you would like to add that I didn't ask?
No, we covered all the things, and you asked me questions along the way.
How about this one? What would you like to share with future generations? What would be your advice?
A return to loving America. America is a great country. And what I hear from my own kids, what was taught, and I have two young girls and three from the first family in their 50s, and I find them telling me all the bad things America has done in Central America and South America, the banana stuff and all this. I still think, I will forever, what's left of me, believe America is the greatest country in the world. And I'm not saying that because it sounds good, but it is. I mean, it is. It was for my parents, probably your great-grandparents. It's not an easy country, and we were never expected for handouts. And now, if you have a problem, you just cry a little bit, and the government will give you money. And we seem to be slipping into a socialism. I saw socialism at work when I first went to Poland in 1989. Poland was the first one to overthrow communism, by the way, not the Berlin Wall. That was 6 months later. Poland had an election in June. I was there, and it was like carnival. I mean, we were getting rid of the commies. It was a velvet one, I guess you can call it, because there was no shooting. There was killings before, though, up in Gdańsk. There was killings in the mines in the southwestern part of Poland. But I saw socialism at work. I tell people when they give me a little hard time here, I love socialism. It's the only time that my dollar was worth a lot. I could take a date to the best hotel in town, take the top of the menu, whatever it was, have a few drinks, and in 1989 it was hard to spend $5, tipping 40%. They loved me in that hotel. I lived there 3 months before I got a townhouse. So socialism works if you are an American, but it isn't going to work if America is a socialist country. I'm sorry, my politics shows through my skin. How you can vote and a man like Fetterman get in, I don't care what party you're in. But my thought, to sum up my very mouthy talk, is that we have the greatest country, and if you don't believe it, try some other country. Try living in some other country. People do it. Retirees, you can live pretty well. I have friends living in Mazatlan, Mexico. They keep talking for us to go over there. I don't know, America is still my country. Western New York isn't, for two reasons: the politics, the very strong unions, and thirdly, just an attitude that's different than what I had when I was growing up. So the message that I'd have for future generations: get an education, and get an education that you can use. My engineering, as old as it was, after a while, it's still the ticket that opens doors. It's not, you can't ask me some quadratic equation. Yeah, maybe I could give you that one, but most of them, it's just the fact that you have something respected, and it did me wonders in the Navy. Even though I never did really engineering in the Navy. That's the best I can do, Patrick.
Okay, well, it's been pretty darn good. Well, I want to thank you, Stanley, so much for taking the time to speak with me and to share your story. And I want to thank you for everything you've done for our country.
I appreciate it. I appreciate you letting me talk on some areas where you probably wanted to cut me loose, or not cut me loose, but do something. Anyway, thank you very much.